No doubt you've seen all the advertising for some of the movies that are out there right now. We have the newest one from Angel Studios that has now been released, and it is the story of Bonhoeffer. We're going to be looking at that one today, and then we are going to take an in-depth look at another movie that has been released for Christmas called Red One. You may think it's innocent enough, Santa Claus is kidnapped. But we're going to get into the depths of that movie. This is an episode you are not going to want to miss, so stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz. And welcome to Live Life in the Spirit.
So we have been excited about seeing Bonhoeffer since we first heard
August.
I was going to say, we first heard that they were doing it. And I think when Letters to the American Church came out, they were kind of hinting around it about then. And so we were eager to see it, and it didn't disappoint.
No, it did not. But with anything, again, you have to realize, this is a man's entire life, and it's shoved into an hour and a half.
Well, now,
story.
2 hours.
Was that before or after previews?
That did not include the reviews.
So, when you think about it, it's like with any book, too. You try to cram it all in, but they did a very good job, I think, portraying what he was about and what his mission was, and just bringing forth that theology and the eyes open to what's going on around and opening them before they're too late.
And recognizing that sometimes we have to be bold and courageous, and as the church, being silent isn't always what we can do.
And that by being a Christian does not mean that we're supposed to just keep our mouths shut and sit back quietly and allow everything to happen.
And Christ did not set that example.
No, he did not.
He flipped tables.
And cracked a whip.
Yes, he did.
So for me, I've actually seen the movie twice. You got to see it once. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that I could see it twice because I actually took in a notebook the second time. Because there were a lot of one-liners that were so deep, or passages that I really wanted to write down. Because I knew I would not.
There's no way to remember all of them for sure.
Because again, this is a true story. This is the stuff that was going on right up before World War II. This was before Adolf Hitler. I like how they bring in that history of the chess pieces that were being moved and placed into order before he ever took office.
And how there were people that were like, well, one chancellor isn't going to do that much. Even his mom was like, what? We'll just vote him out the next time. It won't be a big deal. And his dad was very aware of the fact that this was different and kind of saw the writing on the wall, I think, a little bit about what was coming. So interesting, because that can happen anytime.
I liked how they took him from young and what formed and shaped him, and the journey that God had put him on. He had always been on the road to be a pastor. But the journey, God sent him all over the world, and he realized it was not about religion, it was about a relationship, and that's the best part. And he so bad wanted to bring that back to the Church of Germany,
right,
and show them what a true relationship with God, with Christ was like.
He found what it was like to have faith like a child well into his adulthood and his walk in Christianity, because he got excited about it, and he was passionate about it, and he was on fire. And I think that was required for him to be able to do what God called him to do.
Yes, because if it had only been a head thing and not the heart thing, he wouldn't have been able to be as bold and courageous and as convicted, I think, as he was. But there was a spot in there where he was having a hard time because he'd come back. And all of a sudden, the bishop was already behind Hitler. And he's up in the pulpit, and it's not a sermon. It is a rally. It is a political rally. Yeah. And it is all basically replacing Christ for Hitler. And Bonhoeffer is just looking around at all these people who are sitting there And either they're agreeing with what the bishop's saying or they're just keeping their mouth shut. And he's the only one having a livid fit.
Right.
And the guy beside him, his friend that's also a bishop, he says, sometimes new change takes a moment to settle. And he immediately, Diedrich looks at him and he said, this is flat out blasphemy. It doesn't need any settling.
No, it shouldn't settle. Absolutely not.
And that's what actually started the journey.
And he was absolutely right, because what came to pass was that they then started replacing Christ with Hitler and so many things within the church they came in and took out. And so he saw that coming, and that was what he was fighting against.
They took out the crosses, they took out the Bible, not only did they replace the Bible with Hitler's Bible, but the scriptures had been altered.
Mm-hmm. They put Mein Kampf in there in the place of some of the Bibles, and then again, the Bibles were altered. They took and hung the swastika up behind the pulpits in a lot of places where they would have had other banners and stuff.
Well, and no longer were the scriptures being preached from the pulpit anymore. There was no more teaching of God's word, and that was what Bonhoeffer was mad about. Mm-hmm. He said that this is God's house. Right. This is a place of worship. This is not to worship a man, even the Führer.
Right.
And that's really what he was bold enough, and I love the fact that before he actually did that, though, he was struggling with this. He knew he needed to do it. And he went to his father, and his father knew he was wrestling with something big. He had just gone to his father, and he asked him permission to be courageous, to be brave. Mm-hmm. And I love what his dad said. He said, you never have to ask permission to be brave. Mm-hmm.
Oh, his parents were incredibly
supportive,
even knowing what ultimately
the ramifications could be. Because let's just say that his first sermon, even though he preached directly from the scriptures,
right,
it did not go over well.
It
was not well received by everyone. And that was the thing. I love throughout this whole movie how you could see that the Church of Germany, the division, really, what floored me more was you had the Gestapo was coming in.
Mm-hmm. And the SS.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And the SS, and they were sitting, in church doing their religious duty. Mm-hmm. And you had the whole congregation sitting here. As the movie progresses, when the truth is finally being said, well, it makes the SS mad. Mm-hmm. The congregation finally claps. After it's gotten so bad,
right,
they finally clap that somebody said what should have been said a long time ago, which kind of was, but they were too
complacent.
Mm-hmm. Too timid to say anything about it. Bonhoeffer's major quote that is credited to him is, our silence in the face of evil is evil itself.
And there's a lot of truth to that.
It's been that way throughout all of history. Mm-hmm. And I like that they hit some of the touchy subjects. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes as Christians we like to make everything like whitewashed tombs, like he preached from. We like to make it all nice and pretty, and since we're a Christian, we have to be pacifist, which means we just have to sit back and take it, I guess. And no, God called. If you read the scriptures from the whole Testament through, He called men and women to do the hard things. Mm-hmm. To be bold, to be brave. I mean, David went up against Goliath. Mm-hmm. He called Saul, but what did Saul do? Cowered behind. Mm-hmm. He called so many. He called Gideon. I mean, he was a farmer. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a mighty warrior, and yet an angel showed up and said, mighty warrior. And he goes, who me?
Yeah. There must be someone else here.
Yeah, the whole Bible is packed of people that God used for such a time as this, including Esther.
That's right. To ensure that people are still getting the truth.
They took the means that God provided, and whatever that looked like, even in the face of war, they were obedient. In fact, that's even one of my favorite quotes from Bonhoeffer is,
one act of obedience is worth 100 sermons. I thought, how true. I mean, that goes along with a picture is worth 1,000 words. I mean, the things that we do, our actions have such a greater impact on other people than just what we say.
Well, and they will tell you that it's not what you say that matters, but how you made a person feel, or that you shared the truth. And that's true. I mean, I have been here for 5 years, and out of that 5 years, if you were to ask anybody, oh, so what was your favorite sermon? I get that deer in the headlight. But that one act of obedience, they're going to remember, or that one act of kindness, or something
showing
that was
up
to them, or showing up, being there, being the hands and feet. And we see that throughout the whole movie. Bonhoeffer was touching so many lives, even the German
soldiers and the prison guards and
even the prisoners. I think another one of my favorite quotes was, he said, "Faith without action is no faith at all." Our words can be empty if we have no action behind it.
Well, to me, I even think of that as someone who turns to God or professes a Christian faith, but it doesn't change who they are or how they act. Relationship with God changes things. It has to. The very nature of knowing Him and becoming closer to Him makes you want to be better and be different. And so if you aren't, then get to know Him better. Spend more time with Him, because it can't help but change. I love that quote from Mary in The Chosen. I was one way, and now I am completely different, and the thing that happened in between was Him. And that is, in essence, what has to happen when you are in relationship with Christ.
Well, and they show that.
Oh, 100%.
At the beginning, because when Diedrich comes to America, to New York, and he had a seminarian student that was African American, and so he takes him to that side, so he's exposed to all this. And the church that he goes to, he's so caught up in everything. He's almost like, even though he is so grounded in the scriptures, he had all the head knowledge, and they said that. He had all the head knowledge, but he didn't have the relationship.
Well, and because they asked him, they invited him to dinner, and they asked him, when did you first experience Jesus, or when did you find Jesus, or whatever, and he was like...
it was almost like the whole... when were you born again, or where did we...
Right, I can't remember.
It was a specific terminology, and he's just looking at him like, what? Because it was, the terminology was foreign to him.
But when that man explained his life, and when that happened, he's like, oh, I want that, I mean, he realized that there was something, in spite of how devout of a Christian he was, that there was a piece missing.
Well, because now Bonhoeffer had been a Christian his whole life.
Right.
Where this gentleman who was a pastor, he talked about how he had been so far away, and he came to a tent revival, and it was the pastor there and everything that was going on, that's when he gave his life to Christ.
Right.
And I think that's why Diedrich was like, I've always been a Christian. But it was when the pastor said, taste and see that God is good. And Bonhoeffer goes, well, yes, God is good. He says, it's one thing to say He's good, and it's another to experience the goodness. And you could just see that hunger. And then when he got it, because that was a foreign concept in Europe. And that is the hunger, that is the knowledge and the experience that he had, that he wanted to take back and share with everyone else. And when he goes back, and then he sees that all of a sudden now, church isn't even the Stoic church that it was before. Now they're just caving, and they're letting Hitler take over everything. And
because it started with the things that we talked about before. They took out the crucifixes, and then they came in and said Jesus wasn't going to be Jewish anymore. We're going to have an Aryan Jesus. And I know you had some thoughts on the word Aryan.
Yes, that goes way more beyond than what we would think. It did not mean that Jesus was blonde-haired, blue-eyes necessarily. What Hitler was doing with the occult, what Hitler was doing behind the scenes with all the genetic testing and research, he was trying to, in conjunction with the fallen realm, bring back the Nephilim.
Imagine that.
Now again, there's no way that you can encompass a person's entire life or story, or even really what went on in an hour-and-a-half movie. And I know the title is to try to grab you in, pastor, assassin, spy. the spy to me was still even kind of iffy what they showed, and the assassin, he didn't actually try to kill anybody. It was just he had knowledge of it. But I guess the spy part, he was working for Germany, and he had the opportunity to free 7 of the Jewish men that were in the concentration camp. And now they were supposed to be, this was a whole thing through German, they were hearing the propaganda of the other countries about what was going on with the Jews, and so they were going to let 7 of them go, and they had to go and tell the president of the country or whatever that
they were being well fed and well cared for, and they'd
there's nothing to see here.
Right, never felt safer in their entire life.
And they were supposed to just to get to walk in. But Bonhoeffer, God had put it in his heart. He knew that that was not going to happen. And so the other countries, France and Spain and England, and the people from there took up a collection, basically, and paid the marks that was due per person. And I don't remember offhand, it was 10,000 marks or something per person, and there was 7 of them. And he happened to have the money in the back of the truck that even his brother-in-law didn't know. That is where he got into trouble for money laundering, but it was actually money given to free those 7 men. And because the money was given, they let them walk in. And as they left, that was so cool, because his brother-in-law says, "Do you realize we just saved 7 lives?" And Diedrich says, "Out of 1,000,000. And he says, "Yes, but 7 is a beautiful start."
It is.
And sometimes I think as Christians, that's where we're at with people today. When we look around and we look at the masses, and we are in such a time that less people know about Jesus than ever before, and it can seem overwhelming.
When even what they know about Jesus, I mean, the truth is being squelched and changed, and I think that's just it. I mean, if we look around with eyes open, it can be overwhelming, because evil is bold, and we're going to talk about that, and brazen, and it is out there, and they are coming in and changing our church and trying to cover up the truth, and it can feel like, what can we do?
We have been conditioned to be good little Christians and keep our mouths quiet and just allow whatever happens to happen.
And often it's covered under the blanket of God is love, and Jesus loves everyone.
And as long as he can keep us, the enemy can keep us quiet, then he can just take that line, and instead of moving it a little bit, he can just throw it clear to the other end. And before you know it, you find yourselves in the exact same place that Germany was, and this has been throughout history.
Yeah, there is nothing new under the sun.
You know, at the end of this movie, and there are some shades of The Chosen a little bit at the end, I was so overcome with emotion because it was a trigger. When we had gone to Israel this last time, we got to go to the Holocaust Museum. And well, the Holocaust Museum is very well done, but it is, compared to the video footage that I grew up with, that I saw, it was pretty sanitary. And it wasn't that, it was the weight of that hit, but when we were coming up out of that museum, I looked at the sign from a quote of a lady who said, "We never saw it coming." And at that time, God does give me visions, and I had the whole vision of what was to come. I didn't know when. I was thinking probably tribulation time, or something like that. But I was so overwhelmed, I couldn't hardly even function for the next hour or two. And I had managed to just kind of forget it a little bit, it just kind of was in the recesses of your mind. And for some reason, it did not surface until the end of this movie. And all of a sudden I realized that what God had shown me was October 7th last year. I didn't even make the connection at that time until now. And what was it that everybody was saying?
We didn't even see it coming.
We didn't see it coming. That's not the only time that will happen, but it was interesting, some of the emotions and some of the stuff that this can actually tap. And God is going to continue to call men and women throughout all of this time. And that's why we read Revelation. That's why we did the study on Revelation, because even in that tribulation time, he is still going to be calling men and women who are not going to have to ask permission to be brave. They're just going to be brave. They're going to be bold. They're going to be courageous. And they're going to share the truth in all of the face of lies that are out there.
You know, there were some parts about that, his story, that remind us that we don't have all the answers and we don't have the whole picture. You know, that question of why bad things happen to good people, or why does God step in and intervene in grand ways for some people, and in other ways he doesn't, it seems.
Missed it by much, yeah. Because he had the opportunity to not come back. He had the opportunity to stay in multiple places, but he didn't know that the war was almost over.
Right.
But I mean, he could have stayed away.
And he felt called to continue to act or do something and to be there. I think he felt like maybe he was running away, you know, even though he could have been a spokesman or a voice all over the world. I truly believe he felt like he was following God's call. He died. Mm-hmm. He was killed 2 weeks before the war was over and the concentration camps were freed. And he had been in a prison, and then it got bombed and they ended up having to move them. And
the rest of the prisoners that were with him, they were freed.
Right. 2 weeks later, they all got to walk. And you just have to wonder, and I don't know, maybe his death had an impact on their lives. It would be interesting to see what they went and did after the war, and if somehow...
He was so young, and they said that he had written over 34 volumes of books.
And he did that was one thing they showed throughout the movie, was just him writing down all of his life and some different things. So that's part of where some of the stories came from the movie and what we know of him. But then he wrote several other books.
So while this may seem totally unrelated, you're like, okay, you're talking about Bonhoeffer, now you're going to talk about Red One and Santa. How on earth do they possibly even relate? Well, actually, you would be surprised. So we wanted to give some good news.
Yes. So while we were in Lincoln watching Bonhoeffer yesterday, I got the results back, the pathology results back, and the mass is benign, and so thank God. So yeah, we wanted to just stay and celebrate, and we thought, well, we'll watch something fun,
something we don't have to think about, something we don't have to.
And we're like, oh, a Christmas movie where Santa gets kidnapped. I mean, like, it's been done before.
The cast is loaded.
Yes, lots of great.
Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
Oh, Chris Evans.
Captain America.
Lucy Liu.
J.K. Simmons. You probably know him. He plays Santa. Bonnie Hunt is Mrs. Claus. I mean, there's just a whole slew of people that play these
big name
characters.
Big names.
So you think, and the money that has been put into this for promotion. I mean, like, you just even walk into the movie theater and it is all
everywhere.
So I think it'll be kind of fun. You know, I am a huge Tim Allen fan, and I love the Santa Claus ones. I like Christmas movies.
Yeah.
You know, like Christmas with the Cranks and Jingle All the Way and Family Vacation, Christmas Vacation, which I'm sure I'll get some thumbs up for that one. Sorry, I grew up with that one.
Yeah, and it just fun. Yes,
just something for a laugh. However, why we wanted to talk to you about this is because we are coming up on Thanksgiving, and we wanted to get this out right away. Because if you were thinking during that holiday weekend about taking your kids, your little ones to it, don't. I would not be so harsh on, I don't think I've ever been harsh on a movie. This is not a family-friendly movie, and we are not prudes. Like I said, I like Christmas Vacation. We're far from that. But this has got so much demonic activity in it and through it, and actually what comes out of it, it is not cool. So we're going to break this down just a little bit for you. I don't think it's too spoiler alert. You can look it up anywhere what the premise is.
Right.
But it's the demonic aspect that's in this movie, let's just say, we talked about the moving the line with, like Bonhoeffer saw. 10 years ago, this movie would have never even been made.
No.
Not in this way.
No.
5 years ago, it would never have been shown because people wouldn't have gone to it. And now, the enemy is so bold and brazen that not only is it being shown, but the money behind it, promoting it and pushing it and trying to get people to see it, it just scares me.
And my fear is, because I think this is where we've come to, is that people are going to go see it and they are not even going to be fazed. And you should be fazed by this. You really should.
I love Chris Evans.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and you're like, but okay, this starts out, it's not just Santa gets kidnapped on the North Pole.
No.
This is Santa meets Star Wars and all of the...
A little bit of Stargate.
Yes, all the weird creatures that are not your typical elves. Like what
Throw in some Harry Potter, there's a couple of Dobby-looking house elf things.
They spent the whole time talking about portals. Now, this is not us. We're getting ready to launch, and I haven't decided if we're going to do it before Christmas or if we've got a few other things that we could talk about prior, and maybe start after
January.
Yeah, the first of the year. We're going to get into the whole UFO. We'll get into the UAFs. We'll get into aliens. We're going to get into what is the spirit behind all of this, the great deception that's coming down the pike. But I think we're seeing, and that's my point, these movies and the TV shows that are coming out, they're preparing everybody for it.
They are, for sure.
The whole place was, what was the letters that stood for the mythology? They were the guardians of the mythology.
Oh yeah, Mora.
In a nutshell, this wasn't just, okay, Tim Allen's Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
You had Jack Frost, you had the Easter Bunny, you had the Cupid the Valentines, you had, and I know, even for people who are pretty brutish, that was pushing it. Because you had Mother Earth, Father Time. This was not that.
No.
This was not funny that the kids would,
No, because all of the toy stores in the world are portals that can connect you from one place to the other.
And who was the first mythological creature that they have them in prisons? And who was it? It was the Headless Horseman.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And his jack-o'-lantern head was separate and the horse was breathing fire. That is the first mythological creature that was...
they were interviewing. Yeah.
It gets dark, and it gets dark fast.
Because, and even their take on Santa, he is not the jolly bowl full of jelly, he does 500 push-ups and sit-ups, and he runs, and
he's ripped, and he's
all buff and healthy.
500 years old, or 800 years old, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he needs all this, and he has to have all these carbs, because he expenditures all of his energy on
Christmas Eve. That part of it is different, but I could potentially go with it. But, so, it wasn't like a naughty kid who wanted had a bad present, or even another mythological creature like you see, like Jack Frost. No, it was the Christmas witch.
And this isn't just a witch. This isn't like Disney's Evil Queen or Wicked Witch. No, this is
She was like an 18-foot ogre and a shapeshifter.
Her and all of her
children.
This her sons. 13.
Just throwing that out.
Evil sons.
That were all shapeshifters.
But let's get back even to how does Santa get kidnapped in the first place? Well, this is where Chris Kevin comes in. Now, the beginning of it, he's growing up. We know he had a bad life. And he doesn't believe in Santa. Okay? That's and he's naughty. And that's what puts him on the naughty list. But as he continues to grow up, he's like on the dark web. This man can find anybody, but in the process of that, he finds Santa for the wrong people. He doesn't realize he's finding Santa, but he
finds Santa because he just is the highest bidder, goes to the highest bidder.
Right. So this starts, we're already on the dark web, and we're getting all this stuff. Well, and then we get into hitmen, and we get into and there is a lot of nudity in this. I know it's bikinis,
But they're the...
It's the shots that they take, and the close-ups that they take, and the focus of the camera that they take. And I mean, I know they have stuff there for Dad, and they have stuff there for Mom. And this is not a kid-friendly movie. I can't say that enough. But then it gets, you think that's like a little bizarre. It goes up 10 times.
Oh yeah, because when we are introduced to the witch initially, she possesses someone and takes over their body and speaks through them to talk to the people. And her eyes in that shot look a bit like someone might look if they were possessed.
Not only that, but then we find out that Santa Claus has a brother, a half-brother. Mm-hmm. Not just any typical brother who then happened to be married to the witch, but he is Satan himself.
Well, and he's Pan, really.
Yeah, I mean, he is.
He is Pan. He's the goat man. But they call him Krampus. They call him, I mean, they say he's demonic. That word is used in we're not putting that word into it. They use it in the movie. A demonic brother.
And unlike Pan, he actually has
Satan's horns.
He has a forked tongue.
It's very gross. A tail.
He has the yeah. I mean, this is beyond. And then how they get to him is going through, well, in a cemetery, through a mausoleum. Okay, now if you are, I am a Once Upon a Time fan. I just am. If you really, really watch that, yeah, some of them are just, but there's a lot of theology in there. But you can see some of the stuff here. Unlike that show where you had an evil queen and you had a wicked witch. I mean, this takes this beyond even. I mean, this would make both the witch and the queen shaken in the boots if they had met this guy. I mean, this makes the dark one look like nothing, you know. But with her, you had to go into a mausoleum to go to her basement. This one, you go into a mausoleum to go through a portal that brings you to Krampus's domain.
And it says they don't go in and he never comes out. So he just has his own plane that is his plane of existence. And it is dark.
And you don't know that that's his vehicle. I thought it was like almost a coffin. I expected it to be like vampire.
It's like lined with skulls.
Oh, I mean, that is like really, that's even over the top, I thought. But they have, what's guarding his place?
Hellhounds.
And
we're not calling them that. They call them hellhounds.
Yeah, and this isn't like some of the Greek mythology, just like big bulldogs. No,
they have very demonic looking faces and teeth, you know.
Over the top.
Now, they add some levity because they entertain the hellhounds with a chicken. Now, that's kind of funny. But,
and again, you know, I
just have to be careful.
You just have to be careful because the point of this whole thing is the demonic nature of it and introducing it into a comedy for kids.
Or a family movie for the holiday season.
And the more you watch this stuff, the more you become like those very people when Hitler started to take over Germany, and you're so shocked that you just sit there without words. And
sometimes change just has to settle. Yeah. This should not settle, and yet it has. It has. In so many people and in so many places that we're just like, I mean, I know even sometimes when I talk about this with some of my family, I get the feeling that they're like, you're just overreacting.
Yeah, we're not.
No.
I mean, we've seen a lot of movies.
We have.
And I have not ever come out this strongly against any movie. But this one, because not only is it over the top, but to me, it is that line in the sand. And once we have crossed this, it isn't going back.
No. And that's really saying something because we've come a heck of a long ways.
This is the kind of stuff from the demonic spirit behind it that you see in the horror movies, but you don't have kids going to it.
Right. And there is... I talk to my kids about this in ways that is appropriate for their ages and stuff. But watching things, playing games like that, doing different things like that, whether we like it or not, it opens doors. And when you allow that, I mean, it's one thing for us, and trust me when I tell you, we aren't normally caught unawares when it comes to spiritual warfare.
This one caught us unaware.
It did, but there was a battle being fought, and it certainly opened doors. And so if you
can get, I know this may seem out there, and you just have to trust us when we say this, because it's not just even on our own account.
No.
We've known many people who've called us and asked us to help on the spiritual healing side, the demonic side, where their kids were watching things that they should not have, and they have actually taken on entities. And this is definitely one of those. It's packaged in a pretty box with a pretty little bow. And trust me when I say don't open it.
Don't open it. No.
I mean, I love at the end how they have to throw in, of course, the feel good. They get Santa back. It's not easy, but they get Santa back. And I said it'll be Krampus that'll show up, and him as the figure of Satan. It's going to be there's redemption and salvation for you. Well, they didn't do the salvation part, but there was definitely that hint of redemption. Why would Santa even have a half-brother who would be Satan?
I mean, just not a necessary
I know
story
Santa people say, you take the letters and it says Satan. I mean, I get that. But this was
so far from and yes, like even the premise of Santa, I mean, that he sees the little child in even the adults, and that's the good. And they talked about the fact that there's so many more people on the naughty list and all that kind of stuff. But then what is it that the Krampus and the Wicked Witch, not the Wicked Witch, Krampus and the Christmas Witch wanted to do? What drew them together? They wanted to punish them. They wanted to punish all of they wanted
to get rid of all naughty. But it wasn't just naughty. It was anybody who had ever done anything wrong in their entire life was on that list.
Right.
And so there is that sin factor. As Christians, we know that everybody is on the naughty list because we are sinful. The only way we can be taken off of that list, kept in the book of life, is through Christ's redeeming blood and righteousness. That part, of course, they're not going to put on this show by any means. And it wasn't even, you have the little good overcomes evil because he finally says he's sorry to his son. And he wants to be a better dad. And, so you have some of those elements. We're not here to just, again, bash a movie. What we're here is to be the Bonhoeffers, the megaphone, that the line not only has been set, but it has been crossed. And we're in a pivotal moment that we can either stand up and say, hey, this has gone too far, because I guarantee you, once it crosses, it's not going back. I mean, it's only going to warp speed.
And if you look at what is happening in our churches today, if you look, I mean, we've hinted at this, we've talked about this at different times, but they've tried to change the Bible. They have changed the Bible in some ways. They put a Bible into print that took out the deity of Christ. Now, granted, thankfully people caught it,
and people rose up and hollered, and it might still even be in print, but it's not being pushed.
But the fact that they would do that, that's terrifying.
Yep.
The things that are being taught in churches today, the things that are being pushed in seminary today,
it's not the truth.
No, it is not the truth.
The truth of the scriptures. It's indoctrination.
And the scriptures are not there to match what the world feels good about. The scriptures are there to tell us how to live. And
they stand the test of time. It does not matter what century or millennial you are in.
No.
The same scriptures applied then that apply now.
Right.
So ultimately, that's what we really wanted to bring to you, because this is that bullhorn, that megaphone moment. We have a choice. We can have faith that God's got this, and He does. Nothing is a surprise to Him. But without action, what kind of faith do we have? And I loved the last part of Dietrich Bonhoeffer as he was in that last bomb-shelled building, knowing that in the morning that he would be hung. He took the loaf and they had communion right there. In the face of everything he had done, he was not apologetic for anything he had done. He knew his words and his actions had been placed on the altar of God. And he had tried. Was he perfect? No person is perfect. But he tried to live the life that God called him and to do it out of obedience.
One of the books that he wrote is called The Cost of Discipleship.
And in there, one of the quotes is, well, salvation is free. The cost of discipleship is high. And I couldn't think of any a better way. I thought, man, if each of us had the opportunity before we died to choose one thing, how many of us would be blessed enough to be able to break bread with our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ? To be able to remember that when Jesus took that middle matzah, which represents the Messiah, the matzah they broke every year, but this time when he broke it, he said, this is now my body, which is broken for you. Meaning I am the Messiah and I am laying down my life for my sheep. Every time you eat of this, do this in remembrance of me. And as Dietrich smiled to each person that he handed it to, he said, the body of Christ that is broken for you. And then as he lifted up the cup, and it wasn't any cup, it was the cup of salvation. Each cup had a name. The cup that they had looked at every year and had remembered the covenant between Moses and God, Abraham and God. And he lifted it up and he said, this is now going to represent a new covenant. A covenant between myself and you. It'll be my blood that will be spilled out for the forgiveness of all sin. And that doesn't mean just the sin that you had today. That's all past sin, all sin of eternity, present sin, and the future sin. That blood was shed for true forgiveness. That is why we come to his table eating and drinking. We come to his feast tasting and seeing the goodness of God and realizing that it's not a religion, it is a relationship, because God made us to be in relationship with him. So if you feel that God has been calling you, I'm sure there are many of you out there listening that you've had this burning desire on your heart. Maybe something as simple as a movie that you went to that you're going, this is wrong. Or something that's happened in a school, your school. Or something that's going on in the community or your state or whatever
or maybe
it
even
is.
your very church.
Church or even your family. You don't need permission to be brave or courageous, especially if God is placing it on your heart.
And the other thing to keep in mind that was another quote from this movie was that the truth never needs to apologize for being true.
God's truth is unapologetic. Which I gotta say, I really struggled with that because they call it the apologetics of the gospel. Sounds like we're sorry for it. It gets kind of confusing with the translation of the word.
A little bit.
But you don't have to apologize for the gospel, for any of the scriptures that is in there, because that is God's word. It is true. It'll stand the test of time.
Everything fell into place yesterday for a reason, and the timing fit, and we went to that second movie after watching Bonhoeffer because God knew that we needed to get this message out. as a mom who honestly would have taken my kids to see this movie, and I am so glad we saw it first. We are being brave and speaking out.
What you choose to do with this information, that is ultimately up to you. But you can't say, we didn't tell you. Till next time.
Shalom.